In 2010, the Pew Charitable Trust began working with researchers at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to find a way to measure how well elections are administered in each state. They came up with the Election Performance Index, or EPI, a comprehensive assessment that's based on 17 indicators, things like the number of military and overseas ballots a state receives, the number of voters who are registered to vote, and the number that actually turn up at the polls. The latest EPI, which includes 2014 election data, shows West Virginia is actually improving the way it administers elections. MIT researcher Charles Stewart has been a part of the Pew Project since the very beginning, and he joined Ashton Marra to discuss the results.
Let's start with the Election Performance Index itself. What does that measure?
The purpose of the Elections Performance Index really is to measure the overall administrative performance of elections in every state in the United States. The idea really is to think about elections as being organized around registering voters, getting them to the polls, and then counting the votes. And it's also related to making those processes both convenient and safe and secure. So the 17 indicators together that make up the index are intended to provide a summary measure of how well states administer the nuts and bolts of elections and how that changes over time and how states compare to each other.
Where does the data come from that you all use to rate states on their election performance?
Another number of sources. The most basic data, or at least the largest amount of data, comes from the Elections Assistance Commission, the United States EAC, which conducts every 2 years something called the EAVS, the Election Administration and Voting Survey. That survey asks states, and actually the localities within states, a large number, well over 100 different questions about the process. Things like how many voter registration forms did they process, how many voters turned out to vote. So the EAVS contributes probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the indicators that go into the EPI. The next major source of data for the EPI comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. Every 2 years, it conducts a very large survey of Americans right after the November election, where it asks people whether they had registered, and if they were registered, whether they had turned out and voted. So it's a wide variety of things, but mostly the data come from official sources.
So when we look at the Election Performance Index, the measurements for all of the states, how is West Virginia doing?
Well, West Virginia actually did much better in 2014 than it did in 2010. Overall, in 2010, West Virginia was near the bottom, actually, in the overall average. And by 2014, it had risen up to right in the middle of the pack in terms of the overall score. First of all, West Virginia was one of those states that did much better in getting data from localities in order to even do the judging or do the assessing. And then the second thing is that West Virginia got much better over the last 4 years in getting absentee ballots back and then having them accepted when they were returned.
But still, you say West Virginia is kind of in the middle of the pack overall. What can we do better? Where and how can the state improve?
I would say that the primary area in which West Virginia has the biggest room to improve has to do with registration and turnout. And I'll quickly add that I believe West Virginia, since the publication of the EPI for 2014, has instituted an online voter registration, so has actually taken a step in making registration easier.
That was MIT researcher Charles Stewart speaking with Ashton Marra on West Virginia Public Broadcasting's political podcast, Viewpoints.